Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to my video, or welcome back to my video if you have been here before. So the question I want to discuss today is, did my parenting or parenting style cause my child's schizophrenia? I wanted to discuss this because someone recently asked me this question, and the reason why they brought it up is because they told me that their now adult child blames them because they had been diagnosed with schizophrenia. And so I don't want to just talk about schizophrenia. I want to talk about just mental illness in general. Does parenting or parenting style cause mental illness? So let's dive right into this topic. First, I want to begin by saying I'm not a licensed physician or a healthcare provider. The information I'm discussing is based on my research, my involvement in various support groups, and my personal experience. So according to my research, the biggest factor on whether a person develops a serious mental illness is their genetics. Having said that, there is no mental illness gene, but a person can inherit a higher risk or susceptibility to developing certain mental illnesses like depression or schizophrenia, to name a few. In other words, if a parent, or at least one parent, has been diagnosed with a mental illness, their offspring will not necessarily develop that mental illness. However, they are at more risk, or they have a higher probability of developing a mental illness later in life. The mental illness can remain dormant and never manifest itself, or it can be triggered by environmental factors, traumatic events, or just various situations in a person's life. So when I say traumatic events, that includes physical abuse, extreme verbal abuse, sexual abuse or assault inside or outside of the home. It could include bullying at school. It can also be triggered by drug use, especially on a developing brain, and toxins in our environment and other environmental factors. So a parent could have done almost everything right, and the child could still be diagnosed with a serious mental illness if it's being triggered by some other event and they have that inherited risk. Also, a parent could have done almost everything wrong, and the offspring may not develop a serious mental illness. So just briefly, I want to describe my home environment when I was a kid. So in my immediate family, that included a father who was an alcoholic, and when he was intoxicated, he could be violent. My parents divorced when I was in the 4th grade. However, even though my father was gone, my mother was not a happy person. She was never, to my knowledge, diagnosed with a mental illness. But I do think, in retrospect, that it's possible that she could have had one. I do know that she was not a happy person, and from my point of view, it seemed like she took her misery out on her children. And one of the things she did, there was verbal abuse and there was also physical abuse. It appeared to me that, she would beat or whoop us children over minor infractions. So how I handled that situation was by disassociating. So when disassociating, I mean physically I was present, but mentally I had escaped somewhere else. And I did this by reading. I was constantly reading a book, especially in the summertime. I would read classics like Tom Sawyer, Huckleberry Finn, and The Count of Monte Cristo, The Three Musketeers in one day. So I was physically present at the home because my mother was really strict on us. She didn't want us to go anywhere. She didn't want us to have friends. And so that's how I escaped my home environment, by reading. Another way I disassociated was by daydreaming. I would get wrapped up in really intensive daydreams, and I even had regularly occurring characters. And so I would just literally just sit around, the house, lay on the couch, lost in space, just lost in my own little dramas going on in my head. And this was a safety mechanism for me. And that's how I made it through my childhood. And I only stopped disassociating when I left home and went to college. The threat of that was present in my home environment was no longer present. And eventually, once I left home, I stopped disassociating altogether. Thank goodness my disassociating didn't develop into something more serious and long-term. So having said that, I have to admit that I turned right around. They say history repeats itself. I turned right around and I married into a situation that also involved alcoholism. And I'm embarrassed to admit it, but it's true. There was domestic violence in my household. So in my household, there was traumatic events in the form of alcoholism, and there was domestic violence. So on top of that, my now adult son, who developed a serious mental illness, he had eczema as an infant. And before he was 2 years old, initially the pediatrician wouldn't prescribe a medication for it, but before he was 2 years old, he did end up with a prescription for a topical steroid cream that was supposed to stop him from itching as much. And it did work to a certain extent, but if I had to do it over again, I would not give a child under 2 not even a topical steroid or cream, because toxins in the environment can lead, according to my research, to it can increase the risk of a serious mental illness. And I have to also say that the foods that we eat, as we all know, a typical American diet is made up of a lot of processed foods. We don't know what's in the food. We don't know what's in the water. But I would caution, and I'm doing it now after the fact, but if I had it to do over again, I'm sure, knowing what I know now, I wouldn't even feed my kids a regular diet of certain cereals, because they have dye in it and all kinds of chemicals that we can't pronounce. So I think it's worth noting that our food, and probably the water too, is not helpful. And it probably has an adverse and a potentially potential to increase the risk of someone who already has that risk of developing a mental illness. So another thing I want to point out is that my loved one who developed the serious mental illness also played football. And I know you football fans out there may have an issue with this, but I, now knowing what I know, would not have a child in elementary school or even junior high playing football because of the risk of having concussions on a developing brain. And my son has said as an adult that he's pretty sure when he was in high school that he was walking around concussed, but he didn't mention it to his coach. He didn't mention it to me or his dad because he did not want his playing time limited. So that could be another factor. One last thing that I want to mention is experimenting with drugs at a young age, particularly with cannabis. These days, you don't know what the cannabis may have been laced with. And smoking marijuana during adolescence has also been linked to a higher risk of developing a mental illness later on in life. So to sum all of that up, the risk factors or the triggering that can increase the risk or versus the illness laying doormat, risk factors that can trigger it include experimenting with drugs, toxins in the environment, traumatic events in a person's life, and in our situation, I believe that playing football or a sport in which the potential to have a concussion was there. So to answer the question, did my parenting style lead to my child's mental illness? This is what I want you to walk away with today. No one thing, including poor or misguided parenting, can cause a mental illness such as schizophrenia. The biggest link is a genetic predisposition for the risk, which can be triggered by events or the environmental risk in a person's life. So I hope you found this I hope you found this this video helpful today. And if you have any comments or you want to share your experiences, please do so in the comment section. Take care, and I hope to see you in the next video.